We're live streaming now from Florida, Deerfield Beach, and we had a wonderful turnout last Saturday. I hope we get some of the same people back. We had great questions. This is going to be on the 3 layers of astrological interpretation, and that's really what we're going to be discussing today. When we're doing charts, there's, quite frankly, most people don't understand the layers of interpretation. They don't understand the many possibilities that an aspect has between planets. So when we talk about, let's say, Moon to Mars afflictions, people, you say, well, that's emotional pain or injury if it's an affliction. Emotional insecurity, maybe, when faced with danger or threats. If the moon is afflicted, the moon represents the child in us. Basically it's the nurtured baby, and Mars can be very threatening to the moon if it afflicts it. So, but how does that carry down to other levels? And that's what we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to try to teach you, if you're on board with us here, I'll try to teach you how to carry those interpretations down from maybe the mental, the emotional, to the physical, because that's really what we're going to be talking about. I'm sorry we came on late. I had problems with my video. I've got to figure out why my camera stopped working. And but the camera on the computer works, so we're all set. So if you're out there and have any questions, I hope you'll join us. So we're going to be talking, as I said, about many aspects of astrological interpretation in terms of understanding the 3 layers of the interpretation: the mental, the emotional, the physical. And the overlooked meanings of astrological interpretation, I think, are really in these areas. And so we'll try to, as we get people joining us, hopefully we can have some questions and we can go through this with some meaning here. The sun in our chart, we know that it represents the spirit, the life, the ego, the need for recognition and praise. But how does that manifest itself in different levels? The subconscious mind, we know, is the moon, essentially. And the sun is the conscious mind, the spirit, the will. It's the purpose and the life force. The sun rules the heart, for example. The back, it also rules. It also is a symbol of courage, or a lack of it. Sometimes it depends on how it's aspected and what it's doing in the chart. So it basically reflects your determination and purpose in life. And the closest aspect to that planet, the sun, we call it a planet. We know it's not, obviously, but the closest aspect that a planet makes to that sun shows the area of the need for praise that person's needing the most. And that could be, if a Mars aspect is making strong aspect to the sun, and it's the closest aspect of all the planetary influences to that sun, then that person would tend to have a need of recognition and praise, maybe for his courage, for their martial ability, their ability to handle themselves physically in a fight. It can bring a little bit of braggadocio in those areas. And what a strong guy I am, that kind of energy. So one of my students, his name is Tim, who had a son in his 20s who has autism. And he studied with me for 2 tutored sessions for 20 weeks, actually. And we did his chart of his son, and he had the closest aspect to his son was Mars. And so Tim decided to put him into martial art classes, and he just blossomed with his autism. And he came out from under the shell he was in, and he would be constantly having his dad, look at me, did you see what I did? And Aren't you proud of the, he's basically asking his dad to show his pride and his interest in what he was doing, because he was so excited about the martial arts. And he had a very understanding teacher who took him on. And they had amazing results in basically rehabilitating that child at 20 years old, to rehabilitate him and to bring him outside of that shell that autism often represents. So anyway, so maybe we lost some people by being late today. I hope not, but we're going to go ahead and discuss some of these things. The moon is the soul. It's your feelings. It's your touch. It's your subconscious mind. It represents your feelings, your touch, and your nurturing. And the moon is your habits. It's your food addictions. It's unconscious behavior. It's emotional needs. It's the child within us. It's the mother. It's the home. It's security. The domesticity, the stomach, the breast. It rules all these things. I did a client reading, actually two, for a gentleman here last week, and his girlfriend, and he's a doctor. And when I was doing the reading, I saw he had Mars conjunct the moon, afflicted, opposition to Saturn. And I said to him, I said, you need to avoid acidic foods, particularly meat, because you're going to have, and probably have had, a lot of problems with your stomach. And he piped in right away and said, I haven't eaten meat for many years because I can't handle it. Because I did have a lot of stomach problems when I was eating it. And so you can see the physical manifestation of these energies. If you're really astute with your astrology, not just saying that he's got moon Mars affliction, that he's quick to have an emotional outburst, can be somewhat childish sometimes in their emotional reaction to things, and a quick anger outburst that comes from a moon and Mars aspect that can be afflicting. But if you add Saturn to that equation, you end up with even worse, with the Saturn opposition moon conjunct Mars. So anyway, this is our second session, and we hope that people will join us. We had a great crowd last week, and people from all over the world, actually, from Athens, Greece, I believe, didn't we? One person, and Newfoundland, and Connecticut, and several other places. So
Will you be using your keynote?
I am. Okay. So we're going to, my wife asked me if we're going to be using a keynote. I have a keynote presentation here, and I'm not sure how to make that pop up on the screen for you to see.
On the left side of the screen.
But we're going to try to.
On the left side.
We're going to try to do that. I'm going
Share screen.
Okay, so we go to share. Let me find, how do you get that? Let's see. This is all new for me, so.
On the left side of your
I'm looking. I'm looking.
It should tell you what it is. Just
Screen
scroll down.
share. Okay. Oh, okay. How do I do this? Let's see. Here we
The
are.
one that you want.
Okay, so if we pick this, that is the presentation, the keynote presentation for you to see, for everybody to see out there. So that's exciting. I wonder if I can enlarge that. I think I can.
Yes, it's very visible. Good.
Mm-hmm.
I can see it.
So we're talking about the 3 layers of astrological interpretation now, and we're dealing with the moon at this point. We just dealt with the sun a little bit, and we're dealing with it as an emotional issue. It's basically what we're dealing with, the subconscious mind. People that have a lot of afflictions to the moon generally have also challenges in terms of controlling their compulsive needs, because the moon is compulsive. It's something that is kind of always behind the scenes, goading us on to do things that we don't consciously always know what we're doing. So it can give some very deep, unconscious motives that are not consciously to the surface enough for us to understand what's happening. So if you have a moon Mars affliction or moon Saturn affliction, moon Pluto afflictions, all these afflictions can create emotional challenges. And very often when I see people with Saturn moon afflictions, what I see is people that overeat a lot because they're depressed. If Saturn is afflicting the moon, because Saturn is depression and a sense of non-worth very often. It can also be the opposite of that, the bulimia or the eating disorders, because it can go two different directions. It doesn't always go overeating. It can be starving oneself as well, denying self, which is what Saturn's about, is denying ourselves the nurturing that we need. So these are all moon aspects that we're dealing with. So let me see if I can move on and take you to another without having to come back over there. There we go. Venus equals our needs for love, affection, union, harmony, and peace. Venus equals sweets, the ability to receive or give affection. It's artistic expression in relationships. It's business or personal in general. Also, Venus, like I have a grand cross with Venus. I have my Venus on a cross opposing the moon, squaring Neptune and Jupiter in my chart. And Jupiter always in a chart, if it's afflicting, can create excesses. Okay, Jupiter's abundance, but it can also represent excess. And in my case, I know all throughout my life, I've always loved sugar and sweets. It's something that's caused me, as I've gotten into my later years, some challenges that have caused me to have to discontinue that striving for sugars and sweets all the time. So, you know, as I looked at my chart over the years, I should have, of course, been aware of that. But I kind of, like most of us, we tend to kind of discard things that might be negative in our life or in our chart. But it's turned out to, it can produce diabetes, is what I'm saying. So the interesting thing about astrology to me is also that Venus and Libra, Venus rules Libra, rules Taurus as well. And Venus and Libra rules what part of the body? It rules the kidneys. So when we examine this, it's kind of interesting. The first thing that diabetes usually takes out in a person is their kidneys, kidney failure. So very often, you know, these problems that we have physically are all related. It's kind of interesting how if we want to show our affection or a love for someone in a relationship, very often we bring sweets, we'll bring chocolates. And it's quite amazing, isn't it? How we will bring these types of foods to demonstrate affection. But that's basically something that can be in a chart if you're working with astrology clients. You want to know and be aware that people that have heavy afflicted Venuses in their chart should be aware of that proclivity to eventually end up with diabetes in their life. So that's a little bit about Venus, and I'll move on to another slide here. We got Mars, the drive, the anger, the fear, the courage. Mars equal aggression. It's the conscious, willful passion. It's a drive. It's surgery, scars, violence. It's interesting. I mentioned that I did a doctor. He's a spinal surgeon. I did his chart last week. And he has Saturn opposing Mars. And generally you look at that and you say, my gosh, it's a bad aspect. That's an afflicting aspect with Saturn opposition Mars, and their exact opposition. That, interestingly enough, can be everything from the surgeon to somebody that is very cold and calculating, and even sometimes worse, can be the killer as well. So it can be violence, and that can come from Saturn-Mars opposition or squaring or afflicting. So anyway, so very often you have to recognize too that when we look at these energies and we think of Mars, Saturn as being an affliction, do we actually realize that it actually has a potential to represent somebody that makes his living, and his trade or his career would be something to do with cutting or surgery. And in fact, when we talk about Mars, we're talking about wounds that are burns, scalds, wounds that are caused by cutting. And as I mentioned, when I did his chart, I noticed that he had the moon conjunct Mars, and the moon rules what? Your stomach. It rules your nurturing of your body. So to me, that meant that he's got an over-acidic stomach, and he acknowledged that he did. And that after I told him, admonished him to stay away from too much meat, he told me he didn't eat it at all because he had such a hard reaction to it in his life. So again, let's move on. Let's take another look at another. Jupiter in our chart is optimism, faith, future-oriented. It represents the presence, okay, being in the present, as well as future visionary. It's a visionary planet, prophetic as well. Whereas Saturn is the opposite of that. Saturn is pessimism, and it's always looking back. It's always looking behind. In fact, Christ said to Peter, he called him Satan, or Saturn if you would. Christ said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And because Saturn deals with the past and everything to do with it. People that have afflictions with Saturn very often are very unforgiving and can have a lot of problems with that because they constantly regurgitate the past. They live in the past, and they're never in the present very often. And when they are, it's to discuss the things that have happened to them in the past, and sometimes that's generally negative stuff. So it's not always that way, but it just depends on the chart overall. So you have to be aware that these planets, Jupiter is the planet of the eternal. If you want to understand Jupiter, you have to understand scriptural Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Okay, this is the archetype for Jesus, and it's compassionate. It's prophetic. It's the healing planet. It's the protective planet. And did you know actually that Jupiter protects the Earth from bombardment, from destruction, from asteroids and other things, because it's such a huge body. Its gravitational pull is such that it tends to redirect these cosmic stellar objects that could easily be pelting our Earth into itself, thereby being a savior, if you would, for the Earth. So the Jupiter in the heavens is absolutely a savior of mankind, just as Jesus was the savior of mankind. And so, okay, my wife Elena said that there are 4 people tuned in with us now. I'm glad we got some people on board with us. I hope you'll ask your questions if you have any, and anything you'd like to discuss regarding the 3 layers of astrological interpretation. We've went through a few. If you all just came on board, I can always back up a little bit and discuss.
Sum up briefly what you just said.
So far, what we've done is we've looked at the 3 layers of astrological interpretation, and that means the emotional, the mental, and the physical. And the physical can be just something that's overlooked very quickly in most astrologers' readings. And it doesn't allow them to go deep enough into I believe, the interpretation of a chart to absolutely gain some deep insights into it. So when we talk about, let me get back live a little bit here and say hello to everybody, since we've got some people on board here. I'm learning how to use these tools, so let's see if we can get myself back. How do I do that? Okay. Click on the top. I did. It didn't do it. Chat, maybe.
Chat, yeah.
I don't know. I'm losing it here. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. Jupiter. Let's go. Oh, we turned everything around there. There, I'm back. Okay. All right.
Welcome back.
Okay, welcome to everybody that's joined us. I see we have, my wife said we have, 4 people on board here. So if you have any questions on this particular subject or anything else, it's fine. We can go anywhere this takes us. The most important thing is I was trying to teach the 3 layers of astrological interpretation. And by that, I mean, when we talk about the moon, generally we think about emotions. And if we have afflictions to the moon, we tend to have emotional issues that can be conflicting. The other side of that is that it also rules parts of the body. It rules the stomach and the breast, for example. So if somebody has afflictions to the moon, they will generally take on some physical meaning as well. Just like Saturn rules depression. But Saturn also causes skeletal frame problems, the teeth, the bones. It can cause problems in those arenas. And it's interesting because there's a scripture that says, a merry heart doeth good for the bones. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? A merry heart doeth good for the bones. I believe that depression over long periods of time can produce skeletal frame and bone problems, from arthritis to joint problems and other things. So I think that's all tied in together. Everything is all tied up and related if we see it. So again, if we talk about Jupiter, we're talking about your faith, your optimism, and it can be the planet of excess as well. I was saying earlier that if you have a Jupiter afflicting Venus, you'll tend to have too much sometimes of sweets and too much sometimes of affection, and need for that anyway. So what we're having with those aspects is interpretations that carry themselves down from the mental, the emotional, to the physical levels. And they begin to create, in the case of aspects that are afflicting, problems that can be recognized astrologically. I was telling the story earlier, if you just tuned in, about the doctor I did the reading for last week who had a Mars conjunct the moon, and he had an opposing Saturn. And this was in Capricorn and Cancer. Saturn was in Cancer, a very difficult place for it. So, and I said to him, I said, you know, you have an over-acidic stomach. You should avoid meats and acidic foods. Acidic foods are not orange juice and things like that. Coffee is an acidic acting on our body. It's not about absorbic acid when we talk about acidic, but meat is very acidic in our body. And but I mentioned that to him, that he should avoid meats and at least eat as little as he can, because I thought he had stomach problems, and he acknowledged he did. And that he had to leave meat alone for 3 years. He hasn't eaten it because it's so hard on his body. So this, again, is the ability to see beyond the surface of things, to see how things translate into our physical world as well as our mental and emotional world. And so kind of...
Jupiter in my T-square from Taz Harris.
Wait a minute, my wife is reading me one of these.
The messenger Panchavila said, love your work, Ron.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The messenger Panchavila said, love your work, Ron. Taz Harris saying, Jupiter in my T-square.
Jupiter's in T-square with what?
Saturn is apex in 9th. Cancer, Uranus, 12th, Libra.
Don't do that. Don't give me. Just give me the afflictions. Let's keep it simple, because I can't do the whole chart here in my mind. But give me what is Jupiter doing in your chart? What aspects are making squares and oppositions? So what is it doing? And then you can tell me where Jupiter's at in the chart. That'll help me more concisely deal with that particular aspect.
Okay, I just posted that comment from you. Just
So,
the afflictions, what is Jupiter doing in your chart? Yeah.
so Jupiter can be overexpansive. It can be extreme. I'm basically, my nature is Zeus, Jupiter. I'm a Sagittarius with Sagittarius rising. My sun, Mercury, and Venus in Sagittarius, so I'm very Sagittarian. So Jupiter is basically my archetype. And in my life, it's been true. I mean, I've always done things extremely. Whatever was good or bad, I would very often do that. I remember being in the Navy, if I was 10 minutes late and I knew I was going to get wrote up for being late, getting back to the ship when I was in a port in the Philippines or Hong Kong, wherever we were, If I knew I was going to be written up and punished for being 10 minutes late, I would say the heck with it. I'd take off for 30 days and come back before I became a deserter.
So Jupiter in Taz's chart opposing Uranus squaring Saturn.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So we got Jupiter squaring Uranus opposing Saturn. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And who's this, Taz?
Taz, yeah. Taz Harris.
Okay, Taz. Thanks for the question, Taz. I often describe the Jupiter-Saturn afflictions, and again, don't take offense with this, but it's often I describe it as a manic depressive aspect. The reason I do that is because it's the extremes. Saturn is depression, and Jupiter's exaltation, and it's feeling at one with God, and it's unifying. It's holy, if you would, feeling integration and wholeness. Where Saturn is divided and alienated and separated. So when you have these two at war in the heavens, it's like two angels in heaven fighting, okay? Zeus and Satan are fighting now. They're at war with one another. This usually also gives a great amount of conflict in one's life about religious things, about understanding, trying to establish your faith, and bouncing back and forth between these areas. Yes, I guess I'm getting a response. My wife
The
said.
messenger Pancho Villa is asking a question. What would you say about a woman with a Venus in Aquarius, Mars in Sagittarius, and Jupiter in Taurus?
Well, those don't sound like they're afflicting to me. They sound like they're making good aspects. I would say, let me go back to that. Before I do, I want to ask Taz.
Taz also commented, oh, conjunct Chiron.
Okay, Taz, you're going to be disappointed in me. I don't believe in the Chiron readings. Okay, I stay with the basic planetary influences. If you're going to use Chiron, which is an asteroid, then you might as well use 1,000 more of them because there's so many of them up there. If you want to start cataloging, finding interpretations for all of them, you're going to go crazy. I'm a very down to the simplest of all astrologer. I mean, I'm down to the basics, and that's where I stay, and I teach my students to do that. So I'm sure you can get some exciting readings when you read Chiron, when I see how they print out these long psychological interpretations of Chiron in a chart, but I don't use them, okay? So I didn't mean to disappoint you with that answer, but that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah.
So how did my interpretation of the things I did say?
She says, I know. Yeah. Saturn and Jupiter house also. She says, yes, I know about your reading, obviously.
Okay.
And she also says, yeah, that's much easier without Chiron.
Good. Keep it simple. What's that kiss? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
You know, I honestly believe we need to do that in astrology. I spent a lot of years researching all these different techniques. I mean, I've tried the German Ebertin systems. I've used solstice points of all kinds, parts of fortune, parts of death, parts of marriage, the Arabic parts. People use the part of fortune today, but why don't they use the other parts, the Arabic parts? My God, there's you know, must be 100 of them. So, you know, again, everything you throw in the mesh, the more confused you're going to get. The simpler you keep it, and the more you stay with the basics. Okay, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Uranus. Stay with the basics. Okay.
The little quote, I mean, the explanation from the messenger Pancho Villa is
Talk louder.
And Saturn in Leo. It's about his woman or his girlfriend, about a woman with a Venus in Aquarius, Mars in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Taurus, and Saturn in Leo. You should know the aspects, right? You should tell them that.
Okay, well, Jupiter is squaring off to what?
No, there's no squaring. He just gives
the
planets where they are.
Oh.
It's Saturn in Leo, Venus in Aquarius, Mars in Sagittarius.
Slow down. Mars in Sagittarius, Venus in Leo. What else?
Venus in Aquarius.
Venus in Aquarius.
Mars in Sagittarius.
Okay, those are a good aspect to each other.
Jupiter in Taurus.
Okay, Taurus and Aquarius can be afflicting by square.
Yeah. And
So I don't know if they are or not because they have to have an orb of influence. So if they're within the same orb of influence to each other, then what were the two planets again? Mars and what? That I just said?
Saturn in Leo, Jupiter in Taurus.
Saturn and Leo and Jupiter and Taurus.
Mars and Sagittarius, Venus and Aquarius.
Okay, Venus and Aquarius and Saturn and Jupiter are making aspects that could be a T-cross, which in my estimation, if that's the case, this person, and I don't know who it is, but has been and probably in and out of quite a few relationships in her life and had some very, I believe, some very hard times with Saturn afflicting, if it's afflicting Venus, had some very hard lessons to learn in regard to relationships. And Jupiter is also can be extreme. It can be, Jupiter is a planet that it's the quality of which it needs to experience life and take risk, basically. It's not afraid of risk at all.
Raul has just showed up.
Raul's back from last week.
He's saying, what's the, Ron, hi, he says, what's the positive meaning of Neptune? And the 12th, I guess in the 12th, what does it imprint the planets in aspect to it?
Okay, I don't know the aspects of Neptune to the rest of the chart you're talking about. Neptune does very well in the 12th house. It's a planet that rules that house, actually. And so it generally gives a high degree of spirituality. It gives a high, strong belief system. Again, I'm not sure what it's doing to the rest of the chart, so I can't give much more than that. It gives a deeper comprehension and understanding of the Christian message, quite frankly, because Pisces and the Neptune and the 12th house are all of the Christian era and of that age. So generally people that have that 12th house Neptune are reared in a Catholic home or a Catholic environment, which I wonder if that's true for you, Raul. I mean, I don't know.
Obviously.
And so is that accurate for him?
Well, that's
Does he say that?
He's got a Hispanic name, so obviously.
Well, that doesn't mean anything.
Well, ask him. He says.
I just did. I asked him.
He says, I have Sun, trine, Neptune in the 12th house. I find it imprints kindness.
I find it what?
It imprints kindness. Neptune in the 12th.
Yes, I like that.
Kindness.
I like that interpretation. Raul says it imprints kindness. It absolutely does. It's you have to remember, Neptune is the planet of the martyr. And the martyr is somebody that gives up his own life for somebody else's. And that doesn't mean necessarily the physical life. It means that they're constantly stepping aside and stepping back to let other people shine and to take credit for things. They tend to not be so in need of that, if you would. You got to remember the 12th house and Neptune and Pisces is all behind the first house. That means that, you know, it steps back. It doesn't want to be in the front. It doesn't want to be the leader necessarily. It wants to give credit and help out other people achieve their goals and their dreams and their aspirations.
Yeah, the planets and aspects, he commented. Raul.
What
Planets in aspects. I don't know what he said.
two planets in aspect? I think you said you had Sun trine Neptune.
Oh, okay. Does planets in the 12th would incline to have those positive qualities?
Absolutely, yeah. I have my Sun and Mercury in the 12th, and I have Mars in Pisces. So, you know, I have noticed. I mean, in my life, I did a lot of bad things when I was young. Many of you, if you just tuned in, I don't talk about my past all the time, but if I do, it might shock you. I spent 9 years in prison as a young man, and that's 50 years ago. And I had the benefit of really having a monastic existence for 9 years. It kept me looking inward and searching and studying astrology. That's what I did for those years. And having a captive clientele didn't hurt too much either, because people didn't go anywhere. So I could actually see the results of my predictions and the astrological influences happening in their lives, because in that 57, if it happened to be one prison, there's 57 square acres inside a wall. You pretty much know what's going on throughout that prison all the time. So if I had a Mercury-Mars affliction in a chart, I didn't worry about a car accident. But I might be concerned that somebody would run their mouth and get in a good fight and maybe get hurt from that type of aspect in prison, because that environment would preclude the possibility, of course, of a driver or somebody driving a car. But again, back to this whole Neptunian thing. Neptune is a planet of self-undoing, and it's Pisces as a house of that. It's a house of solitude. It's a house of prisons, institutions, hospitals. It represents monasteries and places where people withdraw from the world. If you look at Neptune's symbol, it's a very interesting symbol. It's a soul, the crescent, being pierced by the physical world. It's like a spike going right through that soul. And it really describes what people that have a strong Neptunian, Pisces, 12th house influence are like in their life. They generally are very self-sacrificing. They can be self-denying. Obviously, a person that goes into a monastery and forgoes the ways of the world to be in a spiritual environment is very much self-sacrificing, and the martyr, if you would, which is all what Neptune's about. So
one of the people here,
talk louder so they can hear you.
the messenger, he said, remember on back in February, I wrote you about how metaphysics and astrology get along.
Who is this?
The messenger, his name is the messenger Pancho Villa.
The messenger Pancho Villa. Seems like I've heard of that guy before.
Yeah.
Historically. In fact, I'm president of the American Press Association, and I actually had some photos from back in the 20s that somebody had purchased.
You communicated with him on YouTube. He had some questions.
So anyway, we talked on YouTube, my wife said, and we discussed the metaphysical connection between astrology and metaphysics. My book, The Greatest Story Never Told, is a metaphysical discourse that incorporates and shows the power of astrology in people's lives. And it's a discussion, of course, of many aspects of metaphysics, from the power of the word you speak and how it can create or destroy your life, from the power of light and understanding it. And one chapter is called The Light, and how we tap into that light and that energy with our love, which is what light and love is. Love is light. God is light. God is love. Okay, in him there's no darkness at all. If an eye be single, the whole body be full of light. What do you think? That I read books, they say, oh, it's the third eye. It's nothing. It's not about that at all. And the singleness of an eye would be a totally dilated eye. That's a singleness of an eye. So, and if the eye be single, the whole body would be full of light. It means the eyes are totally dilated. And very few people can walk in that light, okay, and function on this level we're on now. You can get there by hallucinogenics, magic mushroom, you'll open your eyes, dilate them. So you can get there by consciousness too, just by being a loving person. Because when you look out here and you see beauty, your eyes dilate. Did you know that? When you're looking out here and seeing a beautiful woman, if you're heterosexual, your eyes will dilate. And conversely, it used to be in the old days, they said a woman's eyes dilated the most when she looked at her mother and a child. Okay. And second to that was a nude male. But that's kind of interesting, because many of the motifs of early Christianity had an eye dilating effect. The mother and child, the Madonna, would of course have a dilating effect, because it's something that makes their eyes dilate. In fact, violence, it will make a man's eyes dilate generally. So a bloody man on a cross would surely open your eyes or dilate them as well. There's an old wives' tale that that grandmothers and mothers used to tell their daughters years ago, many years ago. And I taught my daughter this when she was growing up. A beautiful girl that was Miss Orange County when she was young. But I taught her this same thing, that if a man tells you he loves you and his eyes are pinpointed, beware. Because if he's seeing beauty and seeing you as beautiful and looking at you with love, his eyes are going to dilate. It's like a child's eyes. Okay, you look at their eyes, they're generally mostly always dilated. They're not pinpointed. So, you know, our consciousness, if we're looking out here and seeing ugly, if we're looking out here and seeing everything's negative and bad, our eyes will close down. They'll shut down. The light of life won't be in us anymore because it shuts down. So I could carry that. I have a whole chapter in my book on that if you're interested in understanding that principle and how it works and what the early Christians knew about it and how they taught it and what they were about. That's a very metaphysical subject.
You're saying yes, Ron. 7 people are watching. Shall we get back to the presentation?
My wife said 7 people are watching and she wants me to get back to the presentation.
Please, yes.
So we're going to continue looking at the 3 aspects or layers of interpretation of aspects, and by that I mean we're gonna go through them. I learned how to put up different things on this chart. We've dealt with the sun already in this course. We dealt with the moon. We dealt with Mars, Venus, and then we were just talking about Jupiter. And I'll put it up, and then we'll go to the next presentation of that. Let me see here. Let me do this. Get this going here. Okay. Isn't this fun? Now, how do I do this? I go
on the left side, the second from the top.
Second from the top. I click on that. And then I go here. Okay.
There we go.
All right. So we're going to be talking about this now. We've covered several planets. We're going to talk about Jupiter, optimism and faith, our future orientation. That's basically what the Jupiter is. Jupiter is expansive. It's benevolent. It's opportunity. It's blessings. It's fortune. It's magnanimity. Notice the word Jupiter is expansive, and look at the word magnanimity. Okay, that's meaning large, to magnify. Magnanimous is a word that more perfectly describes Jupiter than any other word, and that's in large and animus, animal. So I often, when I see people with strong Jupiters in their chart, and they need generally often to have a large animal, that's something that bless their lives. So it's wisdom, it's charity, it's benevolence, it's Jesus, if you would. It's all the things and attributes that Jesus was. Jesus said it more perfectly. He said, I am, and I am, and I am. You notice he didn't say, I am, I was, and I will be. Because he was in the eternal now, in the eternal presence, which is where we're supposed to be. So that's what Jupiter's about, as opposed to Saturn, which is always living in the past. So people who have strong Saturn, and particularly Saturn afflictions in their life, in their chart, they need to recognize that they need to grab onto Jupiter's energies and start manifesting that in their life to start seeing a lot of good things happen, because Jupiter's optimism and Saturn is what? Pessimism. And pessimism is the lack of faith in good. Basically, that's what it is. And the scripture says, as a man believeth in his heart, so it is. Or so he is. Okay? It says, it's by your faith it's accorded unto you. Think about that scripture. By your faith it's accorded unto you. Well, what is your faith? If your faith is that everybody's going to screw you over in your life, if your faith is that your relationship's not going to last because you probably end up in a divorce, if your faith is that the job you're seeking you're going to get turned down, if your expectations, which means you're out of watch, inspect means inner watch, respect means regardfully watch. If you're expecting your outer watch, if your expectations are negative, you'll tend to attract those conditions in your life. And so by your faith, it's accorded unto you. So we need to work on having more positive faith and more positive beliefs. And I think the early Christians were masters of that for sure. They said that all things work together for good for them that love God. They said, let the fruit of thy lips be the sacrifice of praise, and in all things give thanksgiving and praise. Because they said all things work together for good for them that love God. Now, if that's not optimism, I don't know what is. In fact, when the hippies were being said in San Francisco, they were basically coming into the hospitals with a diagnosis that they didn't have one before. And they were on these acid trips and all, and they'd come in and they didn't know what to diagnose them. And they had a new diagnosis that they gave back in those days in the 60s. And it was called positive paranoia. Positive paranoia. And that's basically what the early Christians were about. They were in positive paranoia. They had this belief system that all things, everything was serving their highest good. So, you know, I believe that and I live it, and that's how I operate on my life, and I really believe it's true. So that all partial evil serves universal good, that ultimately the devil unwittingly is but the servant of God. And if you doubt that, read the story of Job and you'll know that's true, where Satan comes into the council of the angels and he speaks to the Lord. And the Lord gives him permission to go down and work on Job and to afflict him with all manners of problems. So again, let's not get too lengthy on that subject, but that's what Jupiter's about. It's your faith. And if I can change your outlook and your faith and your response to life, I'll change your life. I'm absolutely will change it. So let's look at Saturn. Okay, the boogeyman, Saturn, the devil, the serpent, dragon, all those. Saturn is pessimism, it's caution. Remember I said Jupiter jumps out there. It's very, very positive. It doesn't believe there's any bounds at all. But Jupiter is caution, it's fear, it's duty, it's responsibility. It can be unforgiving. It can be living in the past. It can represent the father, if it's the father that's very disciplinarian, as opposed to the son, which is a very loving father. So Saturn's called Father Time, the measure off of all things. Saturn gives impatience, punctuality, and guilt and accusations. That's how it works. So Satan, or Saturn, if you would, is in the scripture, the devil is called, or Satan is called, the accuser of our brethren, he who accused our brethren before God both day and night. So the constant accusing of others is a Saturnine energy. People say God's within. I say, where do you think Saturn is or Satan is, if God's within? When you see somebody that's cursing and accusing, that's all Saturn energy. Somebody that's very impatient, that's Saturn energy as well. There's an interesting scripture. It says, the devil rages for he knows he has but a short time. Well, there's nothing more ugly than a person that's raging because they're impatient. I saw a guy outside of a dress shop, and his wife was in shopping, and he was honking his horn full blast, never stopped, just laying on his horn. His face was beet red with anger, and he was so out of it because he was wanting his wife to come out of that store, and he was impatient. So impatience will kill us. There's a great book out called Type A and Type B Behavior and Heart Attacks. And they've shown that people who have listen to the words, quoting the book, says people who have a chronic sense of time urgency are called Type A heart attack prone people. They live shorter time. Type A behavior. It's called a chronic sense of time urgency. And there's never enough time, there's never enough money for these people. So they spend their whole life chasing after those things, and they never have time. They never have it. So, you know, it's interesting. It says a chronic. The word chronic comes from Chronos, which is, again, is Saturn, Satan, the devil. Chronos. Our measuring timepieces are called chronometers. We call them watches, but they were originally called chronometers. I have an old watch, a timepiece years ago I had. It was called Hellbros. Hellbros. Had a symbol of Saturn on the face of the watch. The old watchmakers knew from where their trade came from, for sure. They definitely knew. So Elena's not here looking at the messages right now, but maybe we can get back and see if there's anything here that before I move on. So let's see, she's just returned, and let's see if there's anybody's asking any questions. So
Okay. Yes, so the messenger Panchavila is asking a question. Taurus and Sun. Taurus Sun. And Scorpio Moon. Aries Mercury.
slow down.
Taurus.
Okay,
Sun and Taurus.
Okay, let's slow down a little bit. The Sun and Taurus opposing
And Scorpio Moon.
opposing the Moon means you're a full Moon child. Wait, your Sun and Taurus, Moon and Scorpio, that puts the Moon in full Moon position. If it's exactly in the same degrees, then it's an exact full Moon. But it's probably surely in that 2.5 day period of a full Moon that takes the Moon 2.5 days to move through a sign. So if
Aries in Mercury.
okay, stay with this a minute. So the Sun opposing the Moon, to me, when I see that in a chart, that represents a great amount of conflict between the soul and the spirit. Now, it can be almost schizophrenic in its power to pull us apart, but it also can be enlightenment. The Sun opposing the Moon shines all of its light on that Moon, on the subconscious, if you would, on the soul. So it gives a great ability very often to reach enlightenment in life and to really gain great deep insights about the soul and about the human condition, maybe more than any other opposition or any other significant energy like that. The other thing about it is with the Sun opposition, it generally gives a great conflict between the will and the emotions. The will is the Sun. The Moon is your emotional needs. It's your emotional things. It's your subconscious. So what I see that people have that aspect, they generally have a great amount of conflict going on between their will and their spirit, which is their will, and their soul, which is their feelings and their emotions. And this brings us into a battle, if you would, very often with our emotional needs and our spiritual needs. That can manifest itself in the inability to control the will when it comes to eating, for example, the food, the nurturing. The Moon is the mother nurturing part of us. It's the child at the breast of the mother, suckling and taking nourishment. So when you see these opposed, the will and the Moon, the will and the nurturing desires, very often we get compulsive eating too much and eating excessively to assuage that emotional need and that conflict between the will and the spirit, or the soul and the spirit. Does that ring well with you, Ro?
Thank you guys. Totally enlightenment every day. So the next aspect that he had is Mercury in Aries, Venus in Taurus, Mars in Leo, Jupiter in Cancer.
Wait, what is in Taurus?
Venus in Taurus.
Venus in Taurus, what degree?
No degrees, he just gives
okay.
planets.
And so Venus is in Taurus and
Aries, Mercury. That's what he writes.
Yeah, what else? And Mars?
Mars in Leo.
Mars in Leo would be squaring off to your Venus in Taurus, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I don't know, you didn't give me the degrees, so we have what's called orb of influence. So if they're within 8 degrees of each other, they would be called square to each other, and their energies are conflicting. And so this gives a great amount of pain, and generally pain and conflict that comes out of relationships, okay? It can produce relationships that bring out your own inner pain and anguish that you've never been able to express very well. And it can sometimes be directed towards the mate. So this is an aspect that can make for relationship conflicts in your life, and possibly a breaking up of relationships occurring more than it should, maybe in those in that arena. Again, I don't have the exact chart.
I don't know my ascendant sign. However, I lost both parents at the age of 17 and 19.
That would give us good cause to be angry, wouldn't it?
Says Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn in Leo.
Jupiter in Cancer. Do you know what degree it's in? Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So it's a very powerful place for it to be. It's one of the better places it can be in a chart because it gives great compassion and great ability to relate, quite frankly, to women, the moon, the feminine side of things, the emotional side, a great understanding of people's emotional needs, including your own, is very well established by that position. 19 degrees of Cancer is the exaltation point. And if that's the case, it can represent an enlightened being or somebody that's come on this planet, basically to teach others and to prophesy and to lift up other people's lives in a very powerful way. Jupiter in Cancer is one of the best places it can be. We know it rules Sagittarius, and in the ancient days it ruled Pisces. And they had two names in the ancient days. It was called Tonans and Pluvius. And Jupiter in Pisces was called Tonans. It was called the cinder of rain. And then Jupiter in Sagittarius was called Pluvius, which was the thunderbolt, the hurler of the thunderbolt.
Raul was asking a question. Saturn being the father time, what effect would a positive Saturn transit have to a negative natal Saturn aspect?
You have to recognize something about a natal chart, and that is that's the root of the tree. The chart, whatever the root is going to manifest. So Saturn transiting on top of your, let's say, or making a good aspect to something in your chart. If it's transiting over the Saturn and your Saturn's afflicted, it's going to bring whatever that promises, because Saturn is the lessons of life. Saturn is the teacher. It's the taskmaster. Saturn is karmic. Saturn is the law. So what you've sown, you must reap. So when we look at Saturn, we have to recognize that this energy is there to teach us something that we have karmically brought into our life. Do you remember the scripture says that Christ came to free us from the curse of the law? And the law is these laws that we're talking about right here. So how do we get free of the curse of the law of Saturn? First of all, a lot of it's karmic. You've got these things that have been collecting, if you would. It's like a debt you owe. But it says Christ came to free us from the curse of the law. We could say Jupiter, Jesus came to free us from the curse of the law. And that means that once we get into the energy of Jupiter, which is filled with faith and optimism and total trust, then we exonerate ourselves from a lot of the karma of Saturn. But you have to recognize that, one time I was giving a lecture and I was talking about how we sow the seeds of our own ill health and problems in our life, whether it's relationships or money or other things. We tend to create our own problems.
He says, I have Saturn square Mars like Elena. What's that? No.
Yeah. Raul just told us that
he says the natal is the final word.
The natal is the root of the tree. There's one thing you need to know when you're doing charts. You can't promise something that the chart doesn't promise. You can't predict something that the chart doesn't promise. In other words, there's nothing going to change that setup except walking in a higher consciousness and getting into the Zeus consciousness. That absolves us. That gets us free of the curse. The law is a curse. It's karmic. That's a curse. What you sow, you must reap. That's a curse. Okay, so if you've sown good things, that's an interesting thing. You may have sown a lot of good things that you'll have fulfilled at that time as well. But there was something else. One other thing with Saturn-Mars afflictions. I think we might have talked about this last week, but if not, whenever you see somebody with a Mars-Saturn affliction, it's very important you teach them and tell them and counsel them that they should be working out. And why is that? Because Mars is your muscular system, and Saturn is your skeletal frame. What happens is that energy of an affliction causes a great amount of depression if you're not using that energy, and it causes anger, Mars. The only way to absolve that is to work out real strong. I know Elena is at the gym 2 or 3 times a week because she needs that to exercise and get that energy out. And we know it, and I recognize it, and it's a positive thing. But if she didn't, she would get irritable and she would get angry easy. She'd surely get depressed. There's no question about that. So that's part of that Saturn-Mars square or opposition that you're talking here. So I really would recommend, Raul, that you spend time at a gym at least a couple times or 2 or 3 times a week. Because
We have 10 minutes left. Let's go back to the presentation.
okay, let's go back. Let's move on to the presentation.
We have 10 minutes left.
Okay, we got 10 minutes left, my wife says. So moons, we're going to talk about Moon to Mars afflictions right now. What's that? Feelings are hurt easy, emotional insecurity when faced with danger or threats. It can be stomach ulcers, Moon to Mars. Remember, for some of you that might have tuned in late, I was talking about the chart I did for the doctor, a friend of mine, and not a friend, a client of mine, last week, and he had Saturn opposing Mars conjunct the Moon. Mars conjunct the Moon opposing Saturn. And I said to him, I said, and it was also afflicting Uranus in a T-cross. But I told him, I said, you have an over-acidic stomach and you need to not eat a lot of meat. And he responded, I have a very bad stomach. And he said, I've not eaten meat for 2 or 3 years now because of that, because it's real hard on me. So, you know, you can counsel people and carry them down to the levels of understanding that you might have missed if you don't go down these 3 layers of interpretation: the mental, the emotional, and of course the physical. The physical can take other forms as well. Moon to Mars afflictions can cause scars and wounds on the stomach or the breast of a woman. I find a lot of women who get breast augmental surgery have these afflictions, Moon and Mars. And they go under the knife, okay, to the breast. So this all can be part of this aspect. It can be childish when intimidated or aroused emotionally. Remember that the Moon is the child in you. It's the insecure child. And it can throw a tantrum real easy if you have a Moon-Mars affliction. Need for food or sex to relieve anxiety and tension. It's a very strong emotional need with Mars, the Moon. Mars to any aspect of affliction in a chart can do that. Even Mars to, as Raul has, you have Mars and Saturn in affliction. This can produce a lot of sexual tension. It suppresses the anger when you have the Moon to Mars. Very often it is suppressed because the Moon tends to suppress things. But when it's released, it's in strong emotional outburst. For example, I have Moon and I have Sun square Mars in my chart. And I'm quick-tempered. I can fly off real quick. But it's kind of short-lived, and it's on the surface very quick and step aside with it real quick. I don't tend to carry it a long time, but that is Mars is quick-tempered when it's afflicting the Moon or Sun. But in my lifetime, I used to think it was a curse that I had a quick temper. But when I went through 9 years of imprisonment, my temper was my salvation because people feared me if they had to.
Yeah, 7 minutes.
So we'll keep moving on. So we suppress the anger when we have this. So remember, Moon, Mars also can cause a lot of problems in the stomach, okay? Okay, Moon to Saturn afflictions, deep emotional depression. We just talked about Raul. Melancholy and moody, holds on to childhood hurts and thinking of the past, often constant accusing of the mother. I got thinning of the past instead of thinking of the past. I can change that right here. But, so what are we dealing with here? Raul he just share he lost his parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does this say here? Holds on to childhood hurts and thinking of the past, often constant accusing of the mother. In this case, it's the mother and the father both that caused you a great amount of pain, even though it's not in the living state. It still is a very sad thing that it was going to be something in your soul forever, because Moon and Saturn is a deep soul issue. So a Moon afflicting Saturn can give problems with the parents in life and generally unhappy childhood. If other aspects support this, Saturn in the 4th house can also make for an unhappy childhood. Because you got to remember, the 4th house in your chart represents your early childhood. It's part of that. It's the Moon's house, okay? So Cancer also represents the childhood, the early child. Okay, Mars to Saturn and Pluto. These 3 are the worst afflictions in a chart. Okay? And I'm going to show you 3 charts that I've done of clients that have these aspects. And Mars, Saturn, Pluto, it's the worst of the afflictions you can have in a chart. So the first chart I'm going to show you is a client of mine in Sweden. Actually, we Skyped for 10 weeks, and I did private tutoring for her. This is a chart of a boyfriend of her daughter, and he's a drug addict and a father to her newborn. And if you look at Mars up here at 6 Gemini, and can you see it well on your charts?
Yes.
Okay, and it's opposing. It's very wide. It's opposing very well. That's a long orb, but it tends to oppose Pluto because the reason is the sun over here in Leo. Excuse me, is squaring the moon. Let me go through this a little bit here. Saturn over here in Aquarius is opposing the sun. So we got 15 and 13. And then the sun is, because it's a 13, is triggering off the square to Pluto, which brings it into a T cross and a grand cross, okay? Well, this, Mars is not in the cross. It's Saturn, Pluto, and the sun. And this guy was very threatening and very abusive. And he was also a drug addict. And you often see that with the 12th house influences like this. You've got Mercury, Sun, and Venus, all in Leo, but all in the 12th house, which rules drugs. And then you got Saturn over here opposing the Sun. He also abandoned his, she had to leave him, absolutely leave him to get away from him. But you see Saturn and Aquarius over here opposing the Sun, the fatherly duties squaring off to the moon. So there's a lot of problems here with parental influences, moon, Saturn affliction, Sun. All these are father energies. Sun and Saturn are both father energies. There's also other aspects. I'm not going to get into it too depth here, but this is a young lady's boyfriend who is a Muslim. He's a drug addict, and he's a father to this young girl's newborn, okay? So we'll take one more look at another chart real quick, since we're running out of time. This is, I did this chart for her, and it was a relative of hers. And when I looked at it, I said, my God, this person's has either been kidnapped or been raped or something serious here. Because if you look at this, Saturn is squaring Pluto. Pluto rules the underworld. Pluto rules sex and secrets and things of that nature. And it's squaring off to Mars here. You got a T-cross here. See this, Saturn opposing Mars, squaring off to Pluto. That's the worst affliction a person can have in their chart. And she told me that that young girl, when she was young, was kidnapped when she was 14 years old and assaulted. And he took her to an abandoned house and raped her, and he released her unharmed. But of course, how much harm can that cause? Of course, the rape and the abuse. But she survived it. But this chart is of her, and you can see how deadly that aspect is. In a woman's chart, it can be more self-inflicted than inflicted on others when you see a woman's chart like this. I'm running through these pretty fast, but this is a doctor that I know that I did a chart for. He's got Pluto, Uranus conjunct opposing over here to Mars and Saturn. And he's got also Venus and Capricorn. Let me tell you something about Venus and Capricorn. It's not a good place for it all the time. It can be very hard because Venus's relationships, and Capricorn's key word is, every sign has a key word. Aries, I am. Taurus, I have. Gemini, I think. But Capricorn's is I use. And what I've learned in astrology is that when you see Capricorn, Venus and Capricorn in a man's chart, women will often use him, okay? But, I said to him as I walked in, I didn't know a thing about him. And in fact, wouldn't have done his chart, but my wife was with me one day and said what a great astrologer I was. And he said, will you do my chart? And I did. And I walked in and I said, you have 2 children and you're divorced. And he acknowledged that. And I said, and he wanted to know when's she going to get off, off my back, essentially. And my response was simply, you caused this as much as anything. You're as guilty of any of the breakup of, and the cause of it and she's not going to forgive you very easy, because you have, if you look at Saturn and Mars are 17 degrees and 17 degrees, conjoined with Mercury in the 7th, and also the moon here and the sun. All these tend to come in together, and they're in the 7th house, which is the mate, the marriage partner. So Saturn is unforgiving, Mars is angry, the moon is the mother, okay, and the sun is the spirit, and Mercury can be the children as well, but it's all in this house of the married partner. So I knew that he was going to have to pay a big price for this, and I also advised him that he has to be very careful with his relationship with women, and I shouldn't go further with that one. Don't tell more. Okay, so there's one more chart, and I think we're going to pass. This is this is a woman that came to me. She had a husband who was a bodybuilder and very abusive. He threatened to kill her if she left him. She was trapped in a marriage with 2 boys. And this chart is Venus is joined here with Mars. It's opposing Pluto and Scorpio. Mars is opposing Pluto. Okay, that's the planets I told you to be careful with. Those are really dangerous when they're together in an opposition or a square. And they're both afflicting the moon over here at 8 Aquarius, and Jupiter as well. So there is danger to her, obviously, from that aspect. Again, because of the woman tends to have the injury inflicted upon her. If this was a man's chart, he might be more prone to inflicting something on someone else. So there's more to this than that. I just want to kind of, yeah. I'm going to be doing a special here. Let me shut this down for a second and come back to you, and then we'll close this off. How do I do? Oh, there I am. I'm there. So I'm offering a special. My cost for reading, a personal consultation, generally takes about an hour, is $250. For all of you that are online with us today and listening and tuned in, I will do a special for you for $195. Okay. I don't generally do that, but I think it's a way of, I've met some of you, kind of got to know you through just giving readings here on your charts. And if you're interested in that, you can call me. I'll give you my phone number. And you can give a personal call, and we can set up at a time and an appointment, and we can do a Skype if you'd like. And if you're in the local area in Deerfield Beach, Florida, we can get together here. But my phone number is 978-413-3933. Just use that number to call me if you're interested in an astrological consultation. Don't call me to ask me about your chart. If you're going to get a reading from me, that's fine. Call me. We'll do that. I really appreciate everybody that's tuned in. I hope you get my book, The Greatest Story Never Told. It's available on Amazon, on Kindle. And if you really want to understand how to make prophetic charts and know what's going on in your chart and others, I just published a few weeks ago the Cosmic Key to Astrological Prediction on Kindle. It's on Kindle. You can get it there and download it. If you have a Kindle reader, if you put it on your Mac, you can read it on there with the Kindle app. So I invite you to get the book, whether it's the Cosmic Key on Amazon Kindle, or whether it's my book, which you can go to aquarianawakening.com. And you can order the book from there. It'll link you right over to Amazon. aquarianawakening.com. It's had a 5-star rating almost from every person. I think one person gave it a 1 star. And I'm sure the book was very threatening to that person, because they're probably a very fundamental Christian. And if they look outside that, that can be threatening. But as whatever the case, every other person gave a 5-star rating. It's had wonderful reviews. It's been reviewed by 2 of the top scholars in the world, one of which said it should be compulsory reading for every thinking individual. So for all of you thinking individuals out there, get the book. It'll change your life. It'll open your eyes to the great mysteries of early Christian teachings that the church would rather you not know. And this has been fun. I really thank you for tuning in. And I'll give you my phone number one more time. Don't forget Aquarian Awakening, AQUARIAN, Awakening, all one word, .com is our site. You can go to the blog site, and we post all these videos for you to see again. You can go get them on YouTube as well, of course. But my phone number is 413-3933. And this is Ron Watson signing off for another Saturday night. Thanks all of you for joining in tonight. And Raul, thanks again for coming back. Talk to you another time. Bye.